Bruce, thanks for the time. I think maybe let's just begin by understanding which technologies are benefiting who and why.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, Godfrey, and hello to you as well. Allow me maybe to give you a little bit of background around this study that we just launched today from the World Economic Forum in collaboration with Accenture. We looked at the impact on investing in digital technologies. We launched our digital transformation initiative 3 years ago to understand what the impact of digital transformation was, both on business as well as on society. And one of the key questions that we got again and again from multiple CEOs across sectors was not an understanding, there was no lack of understanding of the importance that digitalization actually has on their business. But they didn't know what the business case for digital innovation was. They did not necessarily understand, or there was lack of clarity around the impact of digital innovation on their growth and on their productivity. And therefore, we launched this study, one of the largest of its kind. We analyzed the data of 16,000 companies across 14 sectors, looking at the technologies that you just mentioned, artificial intelligence, big data analytics, robotics, Internet of Things, also known as IoT, to establish what the actual business case was of these technologies. And if I may, the two big findings that I'd like to call out is, number one, over the time frame that we analyzed this data for, which was 2015 to 2016, so within a 2-year time frame, we actually realized that across these 16,000 companies, the investment in digital innovation and digital technologies overall was actually positive. So we've actually quantified the business case for digital, and we came up with the understanding that this was actually positive.
Right. And amongst your findings, which I also found interesting, was the fact that you found that investments in a combination of the technologies led to greater gains versus investing in an individual technology. Can you explain how that was?
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point, and thank you for bringing it up. As I just mentioned, we looked at the investment in individual technologies and the return of these investments, which were overall positive. One of the things we found out, though, was that if you deploy technologies in combination, so if you don't invest in individual technologies, but if you deploy them in combination with each other, you have a 3-fold increase in productivity vis-a-vis just investing in one. So one of the key learnings out of this really was that executive leaders, CEOs who are thinking of investing in digital transformation and in the fourth industrial revolution should not necessarily invest in one individual technology, but they should invest in their strategic objectives. They need to think long-term, what are the strategic objectives of the company, and what are the best technologies to actually then appropriate to this.
Yeah, and then you also found out that there is a learning fee, and I'm sure many CEOs will be very interested to know just how big this learning fee is and which areas in particular it applies to.
That is very correct, especially within the data that we analyzed, so it's 2015, 2016, we found out that the probably slightly more established technologies, that early adopters are companies who are leaders within their respective sectors, actually see a higher return on investment than the rest of the industry. However, we also found out in the more complex technologies, such as the Internet of Things, such as artificial intelligence, which are either very complex to deploy or whose potential is not yet necessarily fully understood, that the return on investment was actually slightly higher for companies who invest in these technologies at a later point and who are not necessarily leaders in their respective fields.
Yeah,
that was actually really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also found out there was a risk here of industry inequality. Now, when you begin to talk about that, of course, we have to worry in Africa because already we are at an equal stage. We are at an equal, we are weaker, let me put it that way, already before we even begin to talk about these technologies. And you find that there is that risk of industry inequality with the top 20% of companies leading other companies. What does it take for one to be amongst that 20% rather than get left in the other 80%?
Thank you for asking that. So the way that we defined leaders in an industry was actually we looked at the top 20% of companies as far as productivity was concerned within their sector, irrespective of growth of company. But we did find, as you correctly state, that the return on investment for these companies was slightly greater across most technologies. The positive message here, however, is actually that we've now quantified the positive return on investment of digital technologies. And I think that should give executives across the globe, including in Africa, a certainty to be able to invest in these technologies. And as we all know, technologies have the opportunity of closing this divide, of closing this gap. Yeah. So I think there is a very positive message to be taken from this.